guys, it's Sam and this is Top 5 Wednesday. If you're new to Top 5 Wednesday, I will leave a link to the Goodreads group down below for topics and such. This week's topic is books to get you out of a reading slump. Now, this is going to be different for everybody, but for me, books to get me out of a slump aren't necessarily like the best books ever. They're not necessarily the books that I've been looking forward to reading. I actually put those off if I'm in a slump. These are books that are quick to read, generally pretty fluffy, not necessarily the best books ever, not necessarily even books that I would across the board recommend, or books that I don't have problems with. Actually, a lot of these books are books that I have problems with. They're just books that are incredibly easy to read and don't take even necessarily a lot of thought, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Like, books can be like for different purposes. So these are books that I read really quickly and that I just inhale read, which is good for getting you out of a slump. So number 5 is kind of just a genre in general that I reach for if I'm in a slump, and that is new adult, which is a genre that I don't tend to enjoy and that I never reach for any other time pretty much, except for when I want to read something very, very quickly. So for this, I want to talk about Amor Amor by Krista and Becca. Krista and Becca in general are a writing duo that write a lot of new adult. They have 2 different series. This one, which I don't even know if it's called the Amor Amor series, but it's like a circus series, and then they have the Addicted series, which is another new adult romance with just a lot going on in. So both I kind of recommend. I actually have the Addicted series as well, so I'll just hold both of these up because they kind of fall into the same kind of category. But I do recommend Amor Amor a little bit more. This is a circus book. It's about a girl who's a gymnast and she actually goes away to Vegas to become part of like a Cirque du Soleil type show, and she falls in with a character who's kind of like a Russian bad boy gymnast kind of, which again, I don't even necessarily ship the people in this series. They're just really easy to read. Like, it's just, things get wrapped up really easily and there's always like something dramatic happening, and it's like watching reality TV, you know? The same thing with this. The Addicted series, the first 3 books, which I am not a big fan of. Book 1's okay, actually. Follow Lily and Lo. They're 2 addicts. Lily's a sex addict and Lo is a alcoholic, and they are fake dating. They've been best friends for their entire lives, and they're fake dating to hide each other's addictions from their families, but they actually end up having feelings for one another and they have to kind of explore that. First book is pretty good. Second 2 books, I was struggling to get through, and then the rest of the series follows different characters, actually. It follows Lily's sisters and their relationships, so I'm looking forward to getting to those, and that's actually why I'm reading the series, to get to those, which I've talked about a lot before now. But new adult and Krista and Becca are really easy to get into. All of their books are available on ebook, obviously, for a lot cheaper than the physical copies, and they're just really easy to read and get through if you want just like fluff. Sometimes problematic fluff, but it's fluff. Speaking of problematic fluff, we have Maybe Someday by Colleen Hoover. I have not read a lot of Colleen Hoover. I read Hopeless, which I hated and do not recommend at all, and I don't really want to read any of her other books, but I read Maybe Someday and loved it. I feel like it's her least problematic book, although people don't necessarily love it, but it's, again, new adult. It's about a girl who's cheated on by her boyfriend with her best friend, and so she moves out, but she ends up having nowhere to go, so she ends up moving in with a neighbor, and they end up kind of forming something. They're both into music and stuff happens. So again, it's another one of those, like, just kind of tugs at the heartstrings. I actually like the couple in this a lot more than I do in the other books I just mentioned. I really actually like this couple. There's also a soundtrack to go along with this, which is just really fun, and you can hear the songs that they're kind of like, he's writing or whatever they're doing, and it's another book that just kind of like pulls you along. It kind of sits in this gray area, which some people aren't going to like this gray area that it sits in, and some people are fine with it. I think it's a gray area, so I'm personally like okay with it being explored in fiction and stuff. But it's interesting, and it's kind of like a will they, won't they, maybe someday. I mean, you kind of can get the point of it from that. So it's one of those books you like, I have to keep reading because I have to know what happens. Are they gonna get together? Are they not? I don't know. So I actually really enjoy this one. That's the only book by Colleen Hoover that I recommend. I don't plan on reading any more by her. Go into it at your own risk, kind of, with any new adult book, really. There's a few exceptions to that rule, but generally speaking, new adult sits in this kind of territory where you're like, should I go over there? Like, I don't know. Like, there can be issues. I'm not sure. But sometimes you're willing to do it. If you're in a reading slump and you just gotta, like, have something fluffy to read, I recommend new adult. Then I recommend the Shatter Me series by Tahana Mafi. I actually don't super recommend the first book, which you have to read to get to the rest of the books, but the first book is a little iffy, but they're really easy to read. They're, like, just candy to me. Like, I read all of these books in one sitting, like, one day, the next day, the next day. I think I read Unravel Me and Ignite Me in the same day. Like, that's how obsessed I was with them. Like, I just needed to know more. The writing is super easy to get through. Like, I just find the story very compelling, even though there is issues with it. And that's just true of this entire list for the most part, with one exception. with one exception. But everything else, I mean, it's just so easy to read, and like there's so much going on, it's dramatic and blah. Like I just love it. This is like a CW show. Like it's like a CW show where you're just like, this is so dramatic and I love it. Like it speaks to me, okay? And I just inhale read every book. Number 2 is Stray by Rachel Vincent. This is the first book in an adult urban paranormal fantasy series, and I do not necessarily like the next book in the series, which is why I kind of stopped the series, but it's a 6-book series, and it follows werecats. Our main character of Faith is a werecat. She's actually away at college, and she gets called back because the female werecats are getting hunted down and killed because they're very rare. There's only a small portion of them, and something's happening. They're getting taken or killed. I forget what the exact situation is. So she gets called back, and there's a lot of tumultuous things with her family. She has a thing with her like first love as well as happening, and like a lot of just drama. I loved this first book. This first book I just inhale read. I grew up on urban fantasy series. I've said this before, when everyone else was reading Harry Potter, I was reading Anita Blake, the urban fantasy series by Laura K. Hamilton. So this is very much like that. It just feeds that like urban fantasy like thing that I have deep in my soul that I keep locked away usually, but sometimes has to come out. And I just loved it. I love the characters, I love the interactions, I love that Faith sticks up for herself a ton. The world in here of like the werecats is very misogynistic, and Faith is not there for your bullshit. And I just love her. And this book was so good. I'm actually looking forward to reading the rest of the series now that I've had a little bit of a break, because the second book I didn't like. But they're just really easy to read. Even the second book, I didn't like it, and I still read it, I think, in 2 days. You know, they're just so easy to read. So urban fantasy in general, if you're in a slump and you like fantasy, it's just like so easy to read. It's usually really funny, and the characters are really funny, and it's just like a good time. And number 1 is the only book that I wouldn't consider a flop on this list, and that is The Wrath and the Dawn by Renee Ahdieh. This book series, I read back to back. I just love it. Like it's angsty, and it pulls my heartstrings, and I've had a few people recommend me do a list of my favorite like angsty reads, and I will do that. So don't you worry, guys. But this is just, I had to know what happened. Like this is one of those books that like you're always on the edge of your seat. You have to know what happens. Like how are they going to get out of this? What's going on? What are the motivations for this? All of this stuff. So I really recommend this series. I've talked about it a ton now. I have a review for it, so I'll just link that on the screen. But this book just like, I think I was in a slump when I read it, and it got me out of that slump instantly. I just adore it. It's just... it speaks to me on so many levels. So that is it for my top 5 books to get you out of a reading slump. Comment below, let me know some books that you think are good to get out of reading slumps. I just realized I didn't line up the books like I was supposed to, like I always do. Oops. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye!